The Canon M50 Mark II. I'm finally breaking my silence and talking about the latest crop sensor mirrorless camera by Canon. This was yet another Canon camera release riddled with drama and unmet expectations, and at first I was going to stay away from it all. I was still waiting on the Canon M7 dream to become a reality, and I too was disappointed that the updated version of the Canon M50 really didn't have too many updates. It just didn't seem interesting enough to buy or talk about. But since so many of you wanted to hear my thoughts on the Canon M50 Mark II, I decided to go ahead and buy it and try it, and now I really do like it. Because the fact of the matter is, the Canon M50 Mark II is a great camera because the Canon M50 is a great camera. And Canon did not screw up the Mark II or make it worse than the original in any way. That is important too. Leave a comment if you know which camera upgrade I'm referring to. But before we go any further, I want you to know that this is the beginning of a series all about how to best use the Canon M50 Mark II for video. The next video is all about vlogging with the Canon M50 Mark II, special considerations, along with the gear and accessories I use to get that awesome vlogging shot. And then after that, I will have a full video demonstrating the best camera settings for operating and shooting beautiful cinematic footage on the Canon M50 Mark II. So subscribe if you're looking to learn how to level up your video production skills, especially with the Canon M50, and jump on my email list if you'd like to receive a message as soon as a new video is released. So as I was compiling the details for the informative and helpful videos that I just mentioned, I realized that my brain just had a lot of fluff to flesh out concerning this camera. Some of the backstory, some of the drama, and some of the things that just need to be said by me as an M50 user, all that sassy stuff that I don't necessarily want to infiltrate my tutorials moving forward. Because the thing about it all is that the disappointment here really only belongs to the original users of the Canon M50 who might have been looking to upgrade. Not necessarily the fresh faces looking to buy and learn about their first interchangeable lens camera. For them, Canon M50 Mark II will be a great camera, just like the original Canon M50 has been for many of us. So just to set the scene, the original Canon M50 is a Canon camera that fits into a very special place in Canon's lineup. The breakdown looks like this. You've got DSLRs and then you have mirrorless cameras. One isn't necessarily better than the other, it's just that SLRs have been around forever. That's single lens reflex, and then the D is for digital. But the use of mirrorless technology is fairly new and kind of still developing. So from these two categories, you have full frame cameras, which are very high end, close to $4,000 just for the body, and then crop sensor cameras, which are cheaper and smaller, but still awesome and usually under $1,000 for the body. Canon's full frame mirrorless line is the R system, which is still very new, but getting better. And then Canon's APS-C or crop sensor mirrorless series is the M series. So the entire M series is very cost appealing to a beginner who is ready to level up their content, and to someone like me, because crop sensor mirrorless cameras and lenses are generally smaller and much better for travel and just lugging around. So I have used and loved the Canon M50 since 2018, and I was expecting a good healthy update on the M50 Mark II. Here's a sneak peek back into the video I made in September of 2020 after some significant rumors were leaked about the update, where I'm outlining exactly what I expect the M50 Mark II to have. So this camera would need to have uncropped 4K, also known as 4K, and also the use of dual pixel autofocus in 4K. So the current M50 has a zoom on the 4K, a 1.6 times crop, and currently the 4K does not work with dual pixel autofocus, which is the amazing autofocus that makes Canon cameras so great. And unfortunately, this one upgrade is not present. The 4K is exactly the same on the M50 Mark II as it is on the M50, because still, I think Canon knows that people think they want to shoot 4K until they look at the file sizes, and then they go back to 1080, and then they're fine. But they do still market this as a 4K camera, even though the 4K just is not the same as 4K on other cameras. This is Katie, by the way. My neighbor rescued her, and now I'm fostering her. Isn't she beautiful? Do an audio test. But of course that wasn't all I wanted, so let's see what else. Besides that, I do just hope we see some of the upgrades that we've seen on the M6 Mark II in the M50 Mark II. So things like 4K time-lapse, UHS 2 card reading abilities, that's like a much faster SD card, very important for video, and also a clean HDMI output, which means that you can live stream more effectively. I would also like to see the same battery being used in the M50 as the M6 Mark II. It's the LP17 battery. It's a little bit bigger, more powerful, lasts longer, so that's always a good thing. I would also love to see the Canon M50 Mark II finally shoot at 120 frames a second, which is super slow motion, and do this without any weirdness. Okay, I'm gonna stop myself right there because when the actual specs were released by Canon months later after this video, we all learned that there was definitely no 120 frames a second, at least not in 1080, no LP17 battery. It is the same battery as before, but Canon did say it was somewhat enhanced, and no UHS 2 card reading abilities. Okay, but it does have 4K time-lapse, and it does have that clean HDMI output, which means you can broadcast exactly what's on your camera onto a monitor without any software in between it, and this means you can live stream very easily and at very high quality. Canon also added a front screen recording button, which is definitely tailored to vloggers, so if you are front-facing the camera, you can just use that button. Although you can also use the front button here. It is nice that the Canon M50 has this, the M6 doesn't. So either option, great for vlogging. There were also some significant improvements made to the autofocus. Most importantly, they added eye detection while shooting video, when the original Canon M50 only offered face tracking in video. So when it locks onto the eye, it's a little bit more specific overall. And Canon also says that the eye autofocus and the face tracking works on subjects when they are further away and when they are moving faster than before. So that's nice and everything, but the original Canon M50 with its dual pixel autofocus always performed super well. There were never any problems with it. So, you know, the improvements to the autofocus are nice, but they weren't necessarily needed. They weren't a pain point. But at least it's something. Besides that, the Mark II offers the same processor, the same resolution, and the same frame rates. Also, the M50 Mark II has no physical differences whatsoever, which actually might be good. Hi! I was gonna say hi. Ella has makeup on today because now when I do my makeup, she's gotta do hers too. Show your makeup. You wanna start a beauty channel? Yeah. You could use the Canon M50, just the Mark I for you for now. So once the M50 Mark II was released, I was able to get all the details from Sagi over at Tech Gear Talk, who always does an excellent job of breaking down the specs and helping buyers make a decision. I'm sure that many of you have watched his videos. And this release got really interesting when he hit the nail on the head by coming up with the idea that the M50 Mark II wasn't even real. It was all an illusion, and that it is nothing more than a firmware update to the original M50. And if you think about it and how all of the updates are simply computer software improvements and the body of the camera is exactly the same, then this makes perfect sense, and I think it's true. So at first I decided I really didn't want to buy the Canon M50 Mark II because none of it felt very exciting, and I thought Canon screwed this one up, as they do. But then I really thought about what happened with Canon and why they were shifting this camera from greatness back to mediocrity. And I think what happened was this. The original M50 was released in early 2018 and it was ahead of its time. I don't think Canon fully realized this at the time, but it was revolutionary in bringing all of the capabilities of the crop sensor DSLR, like the 80D, which was its counterpart at the time, into a much smaller mirrorless camera. So the crowd went wild and people just became obsessed with this camera. So the original Canon M50 was a home run and one of their best-selling cameras, but it was ahead of its time. So then the people who pick up on the cadence of upgrades and what specs are appropriate to enhance over time, even within the same price point, expected a really decent upgrade to the Canon M50 Mark II. But rather than smashing it out of the park, which Canon could have easily done, Canon scaled it back to put the Canon M50 Mark II back in line with where it should have been in overall product placement from the start. They put it back at its place. Because the upgrades we all wanted would have put the Canon M50 directly in line with the Canon M6 Mark II, which would have been fine. But at the end of the day, I realized that this is a good thing because it really does leave a hole in that slot for a crop sensor mirrorless camera that is as good as the M6 Mark II, which is, I'm hoping, will be the M7. So all I want from Canon at this point, besides a G7X with audio input and dual pixel autofocus, is the merging of the Canon M50 Mark II and the Canon M6 Mark II. I want all of these specs, and I even want this body, this streamlined body with no viewfinder and extra dials, but with the flip out screen. That's the camera I want Canon to make next. Maybe it's the M7, but for now, I am happy to have bought the Canon M50 Mark II. Like I said, it's a great camera. It always has been, and the upgrades are very nice to have. And at this price point, it's a fantastic deal overall. It's about $700 for the camera body, and the camera body I just described would definitely cost over $1,000. So when you spend less money on your camera body, it leaves more money for purchases of things like lenses and a gimbal, and those are the things that are really going to make a difference in the look of your video footage. For example, this Sigma 60mm 1.4 aperture lens cost about $300. So that fills the gap between the $700 camera body and the $1,000 camera body, and it's far more important to have a good lens like this with the camera than just to have a better camera body. I also just love having a third camera. The tricky thing about these camera reviews is that if I'm talking about a camera, I like to be able to hold it and show it to you, and obviously I need to be shooting on something else. And if I ever want to do a second shot, which I've been doing in recent videos, I need camera here, and then a demo camera here. So I definitely need 3. Plus, I've always wanted the white Canon M50. I wanted it initially, and I didn't buy it. I got the black one, and now I have the white one. So I like the diversity of my little trio. So if you're considering the M50 Mark II and a higher end full frame camera just isn't possible yet, and you don't feel that the M6 Mark II is quite right because of the flip up screen, then I say go for it. You'll love it. It's an M50 and everyone loves the M50. And we do like to stick with Canon because of the color science and just things about Canon. Even if I'm not happy with their lineup, I really don't want to stray elsewhere quite yet. And that's all for today's rambling. Stay tuned for those informative videos I told you about on how to best use the Canon M50 Mark II and which accessories I'm using to really make it amazing. I will link those below once they are live. And to be honest, you guys, most of that information is going to apply to the original M50 as well. So it will be useful for all of you who are currently using either version of the M50. All right, guys, thanks for watching. I will see you in the very next video. Bye.